Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, March 7th, I believe. It's been quite a whirlwind, continuing to monitor everything that's going on in Ukraine.
A heavy week.
Yeah. I know that the images and videos have been difficult to see, but unfortunately that is the reality on the ground there. So I think a lot of media institutions are trying to ensure that they're not sugarcoating what's going on to the global audience, but they are, I think, correctly warning folks about the images they're about to see. You saw the big decision by the New York Times to go with the photos of the civilians that were shot by mortared by the Russian military over the weekend. Real horrific stuff, guys. So I have probably 1,500 questions. Some of them are redundant, and obviously ask your questions tonight about what's going on there. We'll see if we get to other topics. I'm joined, as always, by my wife, Alex, who's behind the scenes. Also trying to monitor all the questions and comments and stuff that you guys are submitting and curating them. So we're live again this evening.
So since we last were here, you went to Ohio and did a speech, right?
Yeah, last Monday night I was here and then went to Worcester, Ohio last week and spoke to about 300 folks in Ohio. I know some of you came, which was great to meet a couple of you about just kind of the state of play of the media and how to get fair coverage, or the best avenues to getting fair coverage. So appreciate all of you who, some of you drove an hour plus to come to the event, which was great. And then tomorrow night, have an event in New York City with my old college friend, now CNN anchor, Kate Baldwin. We'll have a conversation about the state of digital media and some of the same topics, and I'm sure Ukraine stuff will come up as well. So if you're in New York City tomorrow night, posted it a couple days ago, but we'll repost it. Make sure you're aware.
It's free to come tomorrow night. If you are in Manhattan tomorrow night, you can DM me and I'll send you a link, or I'll actually post about it after this. ALSALL.
Yes, Alex will put her information on the bottom. Jenna Witt loves Kate Baldwin. We're all big Kate fans.
We all love Kate.
Just comment on the bottom. So there's a lot of questions to get to tonight. I'll start with the latest, and then we can kind of get to all of your questions on all Ukraine, Russia topics. This is what we know. By the way, spoke to former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, taped with him earlier today. That'll be part of Wednesday's newsletter. I'll probably put out a clip. It was a very interesting conversation. He was National Security Advisor during the Trump administration, critical of some of the things they did in the Trump administration, but also just looking back at the past 20 years on effectively how Presidents Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden for the first year have effectively tried to be nice to Putin, hoping that he'll be nice. And he's like, that's not going to work. This is not how this guy works. And was really talking about it getting much tougher. And we talked a bit about a no-fly zone. So that'll be part of the conversation. That's the Wednesday newsletter that goes out to premium subscribers of the newsletter. I'll try to tease out a couple things for everybody.
Melissa says, loving the newsletter, by the way.
Oh, I look forward to your feedback, guys, on the newsletter. We're just starting out, so frankly, if there's topics that you're like not interested in, if there's a format thing, I got a couple notes today from folks who want it to be daily. We're trying to ramp up to daily in addition to everything else that we do. Right now we're 3 days a week, so hopefully we get to daily soon.
So I don't see that there is people are asking how to buy badges. I think tonight
Oh, there's no badge option?
There is no badge option. So if you are happy with this, then
you could Venmo or Patreon or something. There's a link. Oh, actually, no, somebody just bought a badge.
Okay, so then there is a way. So whoever
they're gone for some of us, I think. Woes of using IG for business. Badges not showing for some people. It's so weird. So badges are a way to be able to kind of tip me, and help grow this account. So it's weird that at the bottom of the screen, some of you might have it, some of you might not have it, but that's good to know that some of you are not seeing it. So
I'm not seeing it.
We'll talk to the IT folks back at the Menlo Park headquarters for Facebook on that. Anyway.
Much more important subject.
Much more important stuff than badges. All right, so this is what we know. I talked to McMaster on no-fly zone. Right now, it appears that the administration's still not seriously considering a no-fly zone.
For people who just tuned in,
yeah.
Can you just tell them who you interviewed?
So I spoke. You'll see it in Wednesday's newsletter, but spoke to H.R. McMaster, the former national security advisor for the Trump administration, on kind of all things Putin, what to be doing, what we could be doing better, etc. His experience in the Trump administration and how the good, the bad, the ugly of Trump vis-a-vis Putin and all administrations really. So we'll get to that in a second. So this is what we know. Ultimately, a third round of talks happened today between Ukraine and Russia. They ended without any significant breakthroughs today. It doesn't seem like Putin has taken this very seriously, guys. He's been sending his former culture minister as main person in the talks. The talks in Turkey on Thursday could be more serious. They have to do with foreign ministers or involving the foreign ministers. The Russian Defense Ministry says that they're going to allow Ukrainian civilians tomorrow to leave some of the cities, including Mariupol and Kharkiv. We'll see if they, allow that to happen. Remember, that was an agreement. Late last week that the Russians didn't abide by. So we'll see what happens with that. One thing I will say is the Russians say we'll end this if Ukraine amends its constitution to not join NATO or the EU. If they recognize Crimea as Russian, remember Crimea is the territory of Ukraine that Russia took 8 years ago, just annexed it. And that Ukraine also allows them to basically recognize as the separatist republics in the east of the country, which is another part of the country that Russia's like, by the way, that's also not yours, Ukraine. So basically, Russia officially says you need to give up rights to Crimea, give up rights to basically the size of New Jersey on the east of your country, and not join NATO or EU forevermore. Now, Russia's also said you need to demilitarize, and in private, Russians have said, this was not public, this is why you can't really trust them right now. They want a pro-Russia prime minister. They want Ukraine to give up all its arms. They want Ukraine to arrest certain individuals in its own government. So it doesn't seem like a serious situation right now in terms of negotiations. Russia is kind of using these negotiations to continue their assault and their invasion. I did pull up a map of kind of where the state of play is right now. This is care of the folks in the Wall Street Journal. That red area, this is, by the way, as of Sunday morning, so that's about 36 hours ago, shows you kind of where Russia has taken territory. The yellow territory was already the disputed territory that the Russians have been, either they annexed or been, conducting military activities for nearly a decade now. The red area is stuff they've taken in the past 10, 11 days. You see how everyone is headed towards Kyiv, the capital. Now, mind you, this is much slower than people thought. The initial analysis was that Ukraine might not be able to survive for 3 days against the Russian military. The Ukrainian military has shown otherwise, and also the Russian military has shown itself really kind of underperforming here. So that's notable. You see down in the bottom left of the screen the city of Odessa, big Ukrainian city. They're very concerned that the Russians may be attacking there coming soon. And what you're seeing on the right side of your screen in the east of the country is basically Russia building effectively what's called a land bridge between Crimea and Russia to allow them to have passage. So there's a scenario here, guys, where Ukraine, this war ends, and Ukraine doesn't look like it did before the war. If Russia wants to maintain this kind of bridge to Crimea, we'll see what goes down there, which is unfortunate. And then you see the little black logos there. Those are all nuclear power plants. The one that is just near the red area near Carlson, that's the biggest one in all of Europe. That's the one that they effectively attacked, almost blew up. They've now taken it over. To the north, the shaded out gray one on the Belarus border, that's Chernobyl, which is deactivated. There's about 100 folks, employees of Chernobyl, who are basically working at gunpoint under the Russians to keep that thing going, because even though it's been decommissioned after the meltdown in '86, they still have to cool the place. Otherwise, you risk a future meltdown. That's the situation in Fukushima in Japan. Also, Chernobyl is basically for the rest of time, given the nature of the meltdowns, we need to have active presence there. So the poor folks who work at Chernobyl are basically, whoever was on that shift when the Russians took over, they're still working, haven't been able to go home, etc. It's a really tough situation there. I'm gonna stop sharing that map. One other thing, a couple of things I wanted to get to tonight. refugee situation. This is a map showing effectively we're at 1.7 million, so this is slightly dated in terms of number of Ukrainians who've left the country. 1.7 million. You see a certain amount, tens of thousands have gone to Russia. These are probably Russian Ukrainians who are living in the east of the country who feel safe going to Russia. The vast majority, 90% plus, have gone to the west. That includes Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, a certain extent Moldova. They're now heading further into Europe. There's a controversy today related to the UK, England. Boris Johnson says they will eventually take up to 200,000 Ukrainians into England, but they will not do it just arbitrarily. They want to see visas, etc. So there was a whole controversy today, like why won't the UK let in refugees? And they, the pushback from the UK government was, we want to do it in an organized way. Now keep in mind, Ukraine's a country of 44 million. 1.7 million have now left the country. So you're approaching nearly 5%. Between 3 and 5% of Ukrainians have left the country. You could get up to 10%. 25% of the country could be refugees. That's the current estimate. Obviously, we don't know how long this goes. By the way, many of those people might not return to Ukraine. Ukraine will be a very different country afterwards. And these are all people who had jobs, who had homes, who had businesses, families, etc. Ukraine is permanently going to be changed by this.
You've gotten so many questions. You've gotten them multiple times by the same people. I want everybody to know that I'm copying the questions, so you don't have to ask your question again.
Okay.
I got them, and then you will address them. You just are spending the next couple of minutes trying to go through your list.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go.
People to know that.
Cool. Yeah. So Alex, my wife, is behind the scenes curating your questions. So if you've asked your question, she's copying and pasting it, so you don't have to paste it multiple times. And so just wanted to give everyone the headlines to begin with, and then we'll kind of dive into questions. So we've talked refugees, we've talked negotiations. The other big thing with the negotiations, by the way, is you've had the Israeli prime minister flew on the Sabbath, Saturday, to meet with Putin. Naftali Bennett is his name, trying to help negotiate given the good relationship they have with both Ukraine and Russia. The Saudis have offered to mediate. Probably not going to take up those guys on it. There's been push to have China mediate, but Ukrainians are skeptical of that. Most folks in the West, the Russians are skeptical of. Macron, the president of France, obviously has a good relationship with Putin, so there's a sense that he could help with mediation. Of course, the Turkish, who are hosting the foreign ministers on Thursday, could be involved. Again, they have a relationship with both of the countries. So we'll see, internationally, what's going to happen. Obviously, most of the West has instituted pretty harsh sanctions. Posted the story today from Bloomberg that shows that Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world. They have now surpassed Iran over the course of the past week. By the way, something to keep in mind, when sanctions go into effect, they often take a very long time to be pulled back. So if you're, Russian living in Russia, looking for the economy to revive itself anytime soon, it's going to take a while. And if you're an oligarch looking to travel to certain places, you're probably not going to get there for years, potentially, depending on which country you were, you had a home in, you had a yacht on, etc., a yacht docked at, etc. But Putin doesn't seem to care as of right now, sanctions aside. And the big thing that's happening right now is military aid to the Ukrainians. This is my last point. The U.S. and NATO have given the Ukrainians 17,000 anti-tank weapons in less than a week. Context here is interesting. I wanted to pull this up because I thought this was really notable in terms of military aid. Here we go. So there was a $60 million arms package that the U.S. announced in August. It took until November for those items to be delivered. So almost 3 months plus. When the $350 million package was approved on February 26th, 6 times larger, 70% of it was delivered within 5 days. So America, the West, if they want to get something somewhere, they can. So that's been pretty remarkable. It's one of the largest lifts you've seen since the Berlin airlift in, during the height of the Cold War, which again was the U.S. versus the Soviets at the time. And last but not least, the U.S. is working on a 3-way trade to get MiG jets, fighter jets, to the Ukrainians from Poland. The U.S. will give new American planes to the Polish in order for the Polish to send their planes to Ukraine for the Ukrainian Air Force to use. And what's been pretty remarkable is we're nearly 2 weeks into this thing, and Russia does not have complete command of the sky yet, which you would assume given the size of Russia. All right, those are the big headlines. What do we got?
Incredible questions.
Cool.
But one of the questions that you got that I think you should explain very briefly is, wait a sec, this is from Zubai Shiki.
Yeah.
They ask, wait a sec, who the hell are you?
Oh, hi, I'm Mosh. This is my Instagram feed. I've been doing this for about 2 years now. I've spent about 20 years in journalism, going back in the day. Started out at Fox News Channel, Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, was covering politics down in DC for Fox. Spent a couple years at Bloomberg Television running international news coverage. Had a Great Recession, went to cover Fukushima, BP oil spill, spent some time in the Middle East, in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the Gulf, Greek debt crisis, Italian debt crisis, a lot of stuff that happened at early teens, spent some time in South America as well. Then went over to CBS, helped launch the morning show there, ran the 24-hour digital channel, ran the CBS Evening News, and have now been spending the past couple of years doing news for you on Instagram.
And
so
what did you study?
Welcome.
What did you study in college?
Oh, college, that was a long time ago. Studied international relations and security policy. So wrote a lot of essays about military involvement. This was kind of height of Iraq War, Afghanistan. So some of that's still applicable here, obviously. You could have an insurgent war effort in Ukraine. So I have a variety of experiences. And so now I try to curate news for all of you on the Instagram.
So P. Marino 1991 says, do you think the lack of military success by Russia will encourage other countries to take back some of their lands that may have been taken by Russia?
Interesting. The reverse argument, because a lot of people are saying, well, Russia's empowered here to do more. I don't know that there are any countries right now that are looking to begin a war with Russia over territory. I mean, keep in mind, Russia, by the way, is the largest country by landmass on Earth. When you look at a map, even post-Soviet Union, losing those 15 republics, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, etc. Russia's the largest country. Japan doesn't really have Japan's not going to go fight for stuff out in the east anymore. China's settled. Mongolia's settled. I don't see that scenario. I think the bigger concern right now is whether Putin feels empowered to invade more countries as opposed to other countries invading Russia. What do we got?
Melissa Butes asks, why is there Ukraine territory that is recognized as independent by Putin? How does that happen?
So, it's up to Putin to, have his own foreign policy. Over the last 8 years, he's helped kind of arm and support rebels in the east of the country. Remember, the eastern part of the country has a very large Russian population. And so over the course of the past 8 years, there's been an ongoing battle and fight between the Ukrainian military, trained by the U.S. in the West, and the Russian-supported rebels. They have really been at a sort of stalemate. They've been kind of going back and forth. And so just before this conflict began, 2 weeks ago tonight, actually, Putin decided to recognize those republics. That's his prerogative, right? The rest of the world doesn't have to recognize those republics. He decided to do that, and everyone sort of thought, oh, this is his in to taking over those territories. He's going to go in, he's going to declare them independent. He's I'm going to send... All right, we're back. Weird. I decided to go off the Wi-Fi. Interesting.
Okay, but we're back.
We're back.
Good.
All right, what's the next question?
Okay, Magic Mike said, what are we going to do about gas? This is horrible for Dems in November.
All right, so that's the political argument on gas. Let's talk gas for a second. We, this week, have surpassed $4 average gas prices in this country. For those of you in California, you laugh at the rest of us because you're like, $4. How about try $5 or $6? California, unfortunately for you, you pay $1.18 more than anybody else in this country due to the taxes of your state and various fees, etc. Posted about that earlier. We're probably looking at 2022 being a year where you, for the most part in this country, unless you probably live in Oklahoma and certain areas, you're looking at $4 plus gas. Remember, gas prices are not solely determined based on supply and demand. They're also determined by the markets, by speculators. Remember, the barrel of oil went up above $130 over the weekend, solely based on the bet that the U.S. would cut Russian oil. So that's the nature of crude oil. And by the way, when we talk about gas prices, only 50% of gas prices are determined by the price of crude oil. The other 50% is determined by refining, distribution, marketing, and taxes. Now, states and the federal government have a slight wiggle room there. There's an 18-cent federal gas tax that applies to everybody. And then each of your states have taxes ranging from 14 cents a gallon to 60 cents, close to 60 cents a gallon, which is you folks in California. Alaska, you're the luckiest. You have the cheapest. By the way, I said Alaska and a certain Amazon.
You can pre-order everyday items.
Yeah. Alexa. Alexa, stop. Okay.
How do I turn that off? Well,
Yeah.
I think we have to turn it off. This has now been the second time.
The second time.
Okay.
I can't say certain things that sound similar to that certain brand. Okay. So that's the deal with gasoline right now. Now, one thing that's interesting is the markets basically went crazy. It's now been priced in. Will oil get even more expensive? Well, it really depends. And the crucial thing here, guys, is what does Europe do? Because remember, Russia accounts for less than 10% of our oil. When you actually take down to crude oil, it's closer to 3%. Overall petroleum is somewhere between 7 and 10%. We last year imported $4.7 billion of crude oil. Sounds like a lot. Europe imported $105 billion of Russian crude oil. Europe needs it badly. Biden had a phone call today with the European leaders, and the Europeans were basically like, yeah, we can't really replace them right now. And America's like, yeah, we can replace them. Who are we replacing them with? Well, door number one, Venezuela, controlled by murderous dictator Maduro, who we've cut off for a couple of years. Well, we sent a group of Americans down there this weekend to be like, hey, Maduro, want to be our friend again? By the way, Venezuela, most oil assets in the world, but given how corrupt that country is and how inefficient it is, it's just been a complete collapse of 2 decades. Door number two, the Saudis. Saudis have a lot of oil. Hey, Saudis, can you pump some more for us? Well, Joe Biden said, if you look at, I want to get this quote right, that Joe Biden in the campaign said he will treat Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as a pariah over, remember when the Saudis murdered the journalist, the Washington Post journalist, literally cut him up in their embassy in Turkey and sent him back? We, condemned that whole activity, and Biden said, you're a bad person, we're going to treat you poorly. Oh, we really need oil right now.
Sarah asks, will Biden allow an increase in oil production or will he reverse himself on the Keystone Pipeline? And I know you did a huge deep dive.
Yeah, we did. We talked a lot of Keystone. So what will Biden do? Well, there's the federal gas tax question. He released some reserves out of the north, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but that's only a few days worth of oil, really. As far as production is concerned, production is running pretty smoothly, guys. Like, we haven't never produced more oil than we have this year. We're producing about 12 million barrels a day, going on 13 million barrels. The bigger thing is drilling, and I think that's the question you're getting to. Will Biden allow more drilling? So far, he has not. Now, even if he does, if we get to drill more, you're not seeing that oil reflected in gas prices for more than a year, maybe a couple. And some people have to correct me here. The bigger question is, how do we immediately deal with the fact that we get 500,000 barrels a day from the Russians? Where do we replace that? And by the way, remember, not all oil is equal. You brought up Keystone. Keystone actually is built, I think you're referring to the Keystone XL, which is an extension of Keystone. And by the way, that wasn't really going to change gas prices. And that's the oil sands from Canada, which is a different type of oil, which is like only a certain type of refineries can handle here. So it's a whole complex thing. Not all oil is equal, and you can't just like turn on the spigot more. It's not a faucet, if you will. It's not like they turned it down and they're like turning it up. You have to drill more, you have to tap more, you have to then get more refining capacity. All of that, and remember, all of that only accounts for 50% of gas prices. Go ahead.
Christy says, the price of gas is a very small price to pay considering what is happening in Ukraine. I would also rather pay $10 a gallon than give money to Putin or Iran for oil. And then Jess Ford says, shouldn't this get our politicians in gear to find some ways to not rely on fossil fuels so heavily? That's
a big discussion, right? And you would have thought that would have happened out of 2008. We have not seen gas prices this high since post-Katrina really destroyed capacity down in the south. So we talked about door number one, Venezuela. Door number two, Saudi Arabia. Door number three is Iran. Iran has effectively, we've been sanctioning them for a very long time. Iran has 25% of Middle Eastern oil reserves and 12% of global reserves. They have the fourth most oil in the world. We don't buy any of it, by the way. Number one, Venezuela. Number two, the Saudis. Number three, the Canadians. Iran has the fourth most. Russia has the eighth most. We have the 11th most oil. By the way, natural gas. Iran has the second most natural gas in the world. They have about 10 to 12%. Who has the most natural gas in the world? Would anyone care to guess? Alex Hall?
I'm reading these questions.
Russia. Russia has a quarter of the world's natural gas reserves. U.S. is fourth in that. So we keep looking at Iran. Iran we've been sanctioning since the late 70s. Remember the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian hostage crisis. We've been running sanctions on them for 40 years. They've then been developed nuclear power, which people thought was bizarre because you sit on the world's, a quarter of the world's oil and gas, nearly, and you develop nuclear power. Why? You need a new power? Well, what it turns out is they were then developing nuclear weapons. So we have been trying to prevent the Iranians for a long time from getting nuclear weapons because, as we found out, once you get nuclear weapons, you're very hard to manage, like Mr. Putin. And so ultimately right now there are negotiations happening in Austria to revive an agreement. Long story short, this agreement existed for 3 years between 2015 and 2018, negotiated by the Obama administration and Iran. And what it did was that they would lift sanctions on Iran in order for Iran to promise they won't develop nuclear weapons. And there would be inspections, etc. The Trump administration pulled out of that agreement in 2018, saying the Iranians were not abiding by the agreement, either in print or in essence, because remember, the Iranians are building a ballistic missile program. They're funding Hezbollah, they're funding Hamas, they're funding the Houthis in Yemen, a bunch of terror groups. And so ultimately, Trump pulled out, and then he tried to say, hey, let's redo this agreement, but I want better terms. Iranians said, F off. And so now we're back, and Biden's trying to negotiate, and folks are concerned that given the urgency of the oil situation, that the U.S. and the West might be conceding too much to the Iranians, given how desperately we need extra oil turned on right
Melissa
now.
Remarkable says, can someone please open a discussion on rationing? People are so focused on consumption, but perhaps we need to take a leaf out of the World War II home front and limit the use of crude oil.
It's a good point, because we keep talking about where are we going to replace the oil, but the other alternative is, do we look at new energy sources? Do we look at, do we revive the debate here about more nuclear power plants? We have just under 100 nuclear power plants here in the U.S., minus 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania and Chernobyl. It's been pretty safe, especially here in the U.S., and so that's always been a discussion. Separate from that, are we looking more at hydroelectric? Are we looking at solar? Are we looking at proper new energy stuff? And then to the point just made, are we looking at consumption? How do we each turn off the lights and consume slightly less power in order to, be more efficient? Because by the way, we consume more oil than any other country on Earth, even though China, by the way, is 4 times our size. In terms of population, we consume a lot more.
Okay, so some people still want to talk about gas prices and some people do not.
Okay.
If there's any other questions, we can address them in your stories.
Yes.
How does that sound?
Gas prices. I'm actually looking at doing a gas price newsletter special edition this week, folks.
Interesting.
DPs. Yeah.
Okay. Morgan Dry, who says she loves you the mostest.
The mostest
says, is the human corridor filled with landmines as reported by the Red Cross? And she's asked that several times.
Yeah, I would need to, remember, Ukraine's the size of Texas. I think they're looking at various humanitarian corridors right now to evacuate folks from Mariupol, to evacuate folks from Kharkiv. I think for the most part, westbound trains from Kyiv to Lviv and then off to Europe have been relatively clear. But then again, you saw those tragic pictures of the people crossing that destroyed bridge in Irpin, which is just north, forgive the pronunciation, just about 20 kilometers north of Kyiv. So that's a huge thing, is don't kill civilians. And posted a clip earlier from my longtime friend and good journalist, Alex Marquardt of CNN, saying that either the Russians are terrible aims or they're trying to kill civilians. And people are like, it's the latter. And by the way, you heard the same thing from the photographer who captured the photos of the 4 people who were killed in the mortar yesterday trying to escape, that literally she saw the Russians starting to move their aim towards the civilians. And so there's a war crimes investigation happening in The Hague. What comes of that, unclear. I mean, I've been skeptical in my stories of the UN and international organizations and what they're really capable of, because unless Putin's going to surrender or somebody in the Russian government gives him up, what does it matter what The Hague says about war crimes?
What do you think the chances are that happens?
0. There's no chance.
Papa Z says, do you believe that sanctions could ever inflict enough damage on the Russian economy? What is the Russian citizens' response to these sanctions?
Well, you've seen nearly 10,000 Russians arrested in protests, and that's what we know, right? It's hard to get information because there's no independent media there. And even they've threatened Western media that's in Moscow. And so, will the sanctions do damage? Absolutely. By the way, before this war, the Russian economy was the size of the state of New York or the size of the state of Texas, frankly. We use a lot of Texas comparisons, but that was their entire economy, the state of Texas. These sanctions have been crushing. They've crushed the currency. They've crushed the Russian markets. You can't utilize credit cards in most capacities. You've really disconnected Russia from the world. And some of those things won't change for a long time. The people are suffering. The essence of sanctions is make life tough enough so somebody forces Putin to stop this. Make it tough enough on the rich oligarchs. Make it tough enough on the civilians. It is unclear and doesn't look likely that either of those constituencies are going to be able to effectively influence Putin to stop this. He is full speed ahead right now.
Aaron Tuberville said, what is so hard is that sanctions cripple the citizens the most. Who can overthrow the corrupt government when they are only focused on buying food?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is why don't the Russian citizens rise up? Okay, but they're just trying to given everything that's going on, they're just trying to survive right now. And they also know that there are ramifications, that dissent in Russia means prison time, worse, condemnation of family, lack of opportunities for your family. So they make life hellish if you criticize the government. Melissa
Utes asks, can you talk about Putin's threats to those who issue no-fly zones?
So this is the thing about Putin right now, is he's threatening everybody. He's like, hey, you can't do anything because I'm going to pull out the nukes. I'm going to do whatever. He's, playing off to the sort of the crazy foreign policy strategy. Ultimately, he said the same thing in the lead up to the war. Now, if you look back at it, you could make a coherent argument that putting U.S. troops in Kyiv as Russia was building up their troops on the border, we didn't want to do it because we didn't instigate him. Well, it turns out he didn't care. He went in anyway. Would we have been better off having some Western troops on the ground there? You don't know. History has now moved on from that. But so now he's threatening no-fly zone. Well, no-fly zone. I'm going to do something bad. Okay, well, you've also shown that in 2 weeks the Russian military is not quite what you said it was going to be. They're moving extremely slowly. They've taken major losses. At some point, does the West get its act together and say, you know what, there's too many civilians dying here. I mean, those images are grotesque and tragic, what's happening. Do we say, you know what, the cost of inaction is bigger than the cost of action? That the potential downside of a no-fly, fight in the no-fly zone over Ukraine beats whatever Russia will do when they take over the next nuclear power plant or kill more civilians. That's the argument that's happening, right?
Is that what McMaster said today?
There's a bit of what the former national security advisor that I talked to today, I'll have in Wednesday's newsletter, talked about.
So explain that a little bit for people. So on Wednesday,
Wednesday, so I have a newsletter if you guys haven't subscribed.
And by the way, Jenna Gibson says, who is the booker at CBS, said that was an amazing get.
She was helpful in getting that.
Love her.
What was I going to say? My Wednesday newsletters, we do deeper interviews, and so those are for premium subscribers to the newsletter, but I try to put out some clips for everyone on Instagram. Great. So we'll have that.
So both Magic Mike and Yasmin want you to talk about what they believe is biased media coverage from on-air journalists.
Biased in what way?
So Yasmin did not explain, but Magic Mike says that outright racism with the media in this crisis is unreal.
So I think what you're getting at is there's been a handful of lines from reporters where they've said, Ukrainian refugees are different from what we saw in the Middle East. They come from, more European style. I think some have alluded to the race of the people, that they're white. They look like Europe.
You have some
Oh, do I have?
Yeah.
All right, we'll try to block a few of these bots. What else do I have here? Hold on. Sorry. So I think what you're getting at is just the sense that that people feel like the media is covering this differently. Listen, not all conflict is the same. I'm not here to defend everyone. By the way, some things like people should have been more thoughtful in what they said live on television. Ultimately, every conflict is different. In this case, you are seeing refugee numbers in time that is numbers we haven't seen in 80 years in Europe. Comparisons are being made to World War II because, again, that's the geography of it. I will say that ultimately, again, we have seen major refugee crises around the world, right? Whether it's in Africa, in Sudan, in the Middle East, and now in Ukraine. But you can see up to 10 million, which would basically equal in a couple of weeks what we saw out of Syria over 8 years, which is pretty remarkable. As far as, if there's specific allegations as one outlet or another, I think that I think the bigger issue people have is the feeling that certain issues now are getting more coverage than they feel they've gotten in the past. I will say that, having worked at CBS for 9 years, we extensively covered the Syrian refugee crisis. Extensively we covered multiple Middle East and African crises. Now, this has definitely gotten more attention than some of the crises in the subcontinent and in Africa, mainly because there's an ongoing war and you see Putin's invasion. There's higher interest here given the countries that are involved and the size of going on and just kind of our biases, which is a Northern Hemisphere bias, right? That's the thing. That's real. Ultimately, it's important not that the media, when the next thing like this, God forbid, this shouldn't happen again, happens in another part of the world, that it is getting appropriate coverage and that you, the people, and everyone on social media is giving it appropriate attention.
Kay Mazzy says, will the U.S. take in refugees?
So far, this is our refugee policy. I was looking it up today because we actually have rules and regulations in this country in regards to how many refugees we can take in. We have literally a rule that says the U.S. can only take in 10,000 refugees from Europe every year. 10,000. That's like a joke compared to the situation. But until now, we haven't had refugee crises coming out of Europe. The first move the Biden White House has made is it's granted temporary protection to Ukrainians already here, which is about 34,000 Ukrainians. Those are all Ukrainians who came before March 1st. Okay, so now what are we going to do? Well, now we have to basically change the limit on how many refugees we can take in. So far, we're not doing any airlifts like we did with Afghanistan. I haven't heard talk of that yet. Totally possible at some point. If that's something you think we should be doing, then let your local congressman or a senator know. We would have to change the law on how many refugees we can take in and find room to put those refugees on bases and bring them into the country. Rest assured, given the role we're playing here, I think you can presume we will be taking in a significant number of refugees. How significant will be debated in the coming weeks.
So you just got some nice comments. The story of Maury says, thank you so much for these lives. My husband just turned off CNN because you are more informative than them. Oh,
wow. I actually think that, to their credit, CNN's been doing a good job. CNN's gone back to basics here. But I appreciate your viewership here. I'm doing my best, by the way. I saw somebody's blocked the spammers. I'm trying my best to block as many.
You know what?
I got all these new followers in the past week, and
I was gonna say,
got some
nice
spammers
grow,
with it.
But when you grow, you get some bots.
Exactly.
Okay, another thing. S. Miller says, if you know of an organization that is looking for an awesome speaker, Mosh is your man. That was very
Oh, S. Miller came to my talk in Worcester last
very
week.
kind for her to say.
Yeah.
And you love that. You love talking to organizations about, tell them what you're...
So I gave a speech. Well, first of all, I've talked to like high schoolers, talked to college students, I've talked to companies about the state of the media, like, you know, how the lessons I've learned from here on Instagram, lessons I learned in network television, how you go about finding fair coverage. And so, you know, I enjoy those conversations, and I know that there's a lot of people out there who are very hungry for good information amid all the noise out there. So I try to cut through all of it as much as I can.
Mama Shells asks, will fighter jets from Poland and other weapons being sent to Ukraine make it in time to make a difference?
So, good question. First of all, the Ukrainians have put up, military experts, I'm not one, thought that they might not survive a couple days. They've survived nearly 2 weeks. The Russians are rearming and ready to make a second go at it. So far, the Ukrainians have put up a valiant battle. You saw the pictures today of foreign fighters making their way inside the country. And there's been a constant stream of weapons. Now, the Polish fighters, we need to get a deal quickly to ensure that those Polish fighter jets, Soviet-made MiGs that the Ukrainians know how to fly, can get there. Because remember that huge supply train that we were worried about last week? That's still sitting out there outside Kyiv, miles long. And I imagine with more assets, the Ukrainians could deal with that. So I don't know. It's anyone's guess. I do know that they know time is of the essence. And I think Zelensky, it's one of the reasons he's been so prominent, you know, in talking on Zoom, calling foreign leaders constantly to get as much support as quickly as possible, because he knows time is of the essence. Yeah.
Katie Nicholson, 12, says, why does Tucker Carlson and Trump continue to defend Putin?
So Tucker I haven't watched, though Tucker did say before the war that he was rooting for Putin. You know, that's his prerogative. President Trump has had a variety of points over the course of the past couple of weeks. You know, he always begins by saying like he's impressed by him. Putin's powerful. You know, Putin is so powerful because Biden is so weak. At the same time, he did give a speech over the weekend where he condemned what the Putin was doing and basically said, like, if I was in there, he wouldn't be doing that. So he's both, you know, kind of saying Putin's all powerful and really savvy, but only savvy because Biden's stupid. And if I was there, he wouldn't be doing it. I'd be fighting it back, and I'd be taking me seriously. At the same time, he also likes to throw out things like, you know, what we should do is paint the Chinese flag on American jets and bomb Russia, and then they will think China bombed them, which is a very simplistic. Russia will know better, but whatever.
So this was something that you wanted to talk about tonight, and a question was just asked about it. Jacqueline Michelle 310 says, please educate the people on why the situation in Palestine is so different than Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
We got a few questions about this. Gigi Hadid today said that she's donating, the model is donating money to the Ukrainians, and also alluded to the fact that the Ukrainians are in the same boat as the Palestinians, which has led to a whole discussion online equating the Palestinians and the Ukrainians. And so we'll break it down for you. First of all, every single conflict globally is different. Different contexts, different histories, different situations. You know, in the case here, I can understand the comparison and hear me through everybody before people jump on me. In one case, one of these countries has a larger military than the other one. And one is invading and now occupying parts. So you see the word occupation, you see one with a larger military, and you start to say, well, that's just like this. Well, no, they're all different, right? Afghanistan is different than Iraq, is different than the Israeli-Palestinian, is different from Morocco versus Western Sahara, versus different from Ethiopia, different from Russia-Ukraine, different from China-Taiwan, different from North Korea-South Korea. You get my point? Every single situation is different here. Now, in this case, Ukraine-Russia, two independent countries. Ukraine has no claim to anything in Russia. Russia, in this case, has said, we have a claim to you and you don't exist. It's not in the case of the Middle East, the Israelis and the Palestinians. One is an aspiring nation state, the Palestinians. One is the Israeli state that has existed. In the context of the occupation, in this case, you have Russia invading. In the case of the Middle East, the reason why the occupation exists today is due to a war in 1967. I don't want to get too deep here, guys, but basically the Arab countries had surrounded the Israelis. They said, we're going to destroy you. The Israelis launched an attack, took those territories at the time, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, none of whom had given Palestinians independence. And so then they basically traded Egyptian, Jordanian occupation for Israeli occupation. And now, since the early 90s, there's been attempts at a negotiation, a peace agreement. The Palestinians control independently Gaza, that's controlled by Hamas, and the West Bank. In the case of, if we're going to make comparisons here, Ukraine, I guess in this case, people are trying to compare Ukraine to the Palestinian territories. The governments are vastly different, right? Ukraine has had democratically elected government there. Hamas runs effectively a military authoritarian regime in Gaza. Again, I could keep going on details. The context of the invasion is different. The context of the occupation is different. The context of land claims is different. But in this case, you have kind of a more traditional war between two states happening, where one is the clear aggressor here. The Israeli-Palestinian situation, especially as we saw in May, there was an issue about a piece of land in Jerusalem. Then Hamas sent rockets into Israel. Israel returned fire into Gaza, and that sort of led to the war in May. Completely different context and situation than the Ukrainian. Now, that's not to say that there are suffering Palestinians, suffering Ukrainians, that unfortunately, and by the way, Israeli victims, right? And in this case, Russian victims of their own government. And so you could say that the Palestinians in Gaza are suffering under their own government the same way Russians are now suffering under their own government under Putin. So we could sit here all day and try to make historical analogies and metaphors and links, and certain things will be shared in common. Certain things are different. I think we need to be careful before we just kind of throw everyone in the group.
I love so much how people on you don't even get to see this, but how there are conversations within the comments and so many amazing questions and so many amazing responses, and I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Mama Michelle says, any idea how to be a refugee host family if they are allowed to come to the USA? And then Jackie McKinney says, at Mama Michelle's, you can volunteer your house on Airbnb, Google Airbnb refugees and natural disasters host. Then Regan, our lovely Regan, says, usually hub cities that accept refugees with organizations in place to support, but always need help and volunteers.
It's great.
Wonderful,
I love all of you. I love this community. I will, rest assured, share with you. I mean, the Airbnb stuff's been great. Airbnb has done a very good job of trying to find ways to help international crises, given their links, etc. I know that a lot of people are, and I hope this money is getting to the Ukrainians, renting Airbnbs in Ukraine with hopes that money is going towards Ukrainian victims. So. Yeah,
actually going back, Peck Lars asked, is it worth donating to UN causes for aid towards Ukraine, or are they just like mother establishment and essentially useless, should be donated elsewhere?
So I will say this, while the UN is questionable in terms of its ability to impact conflict or prevent conflict or stop conflict through the Security Council, etc., their aid organizations, listen, none of them are perfect. But for the most part, the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, does a very good job. The Ukrainian Red Cross, I understand right now, is one of, if not the only organization inside Ukraine that is helping folks. And we listed in a couple posts this week a whole bunch of organizations that you can donate to. But I think the UN Refugee Agency, I've seen positive reviews of what they've been able to do, and there are a lot of the folks on the ground that you're seeing in the pictures of the refugees. So.
No, somebody said that they wanted to see me ask the questions. They can't see me ask the questions.
Wait, you're going to come say hi?
I'm going to say hi, but
wait, watch your step here.
You can't see me ask the questions because it would just be too tight.
It
would
tight.
just be like this the whole time.
It'd be tight in here.
No.
Especially with vertical. Say hi, everybody. That's my wife, Alex. Okay. Billy Olfart, Israel annexed plenty of area in 67. Yeah, I mean, really, we could do a whole compare contrast of the Middle East and Russia, Ukraine, but I think you could come up with comparisons. You want Russia to play the role of Israel, you want Russia to play the role of the Palestinians. We can go back and forth all day if you want to do that, but just saying.
I just want to mention this one comment. Jewish Wash here says, or Jews was something, I don't know, says, I told my mom, who usually watches Fox News, about your IG Lives, and she's now listening with me. She says that your coverage is so much better than what she usually listens to. Thanks for what you do.
We try to cut out all the noise and folks, though I was at Fox News for a number of years, and they have some good reporters on the ground there. I'm often posting tweets from Jennifer Griffin and the Pentagon team, who I have great respect for them. Mm-hmm. Jennifer was based in Jerusalem for a while and spent some time covering Russia extensively. So they do some good work, but I appreciate having you here. One of the things we try to focus on, is just kind of answering your questions and being very direct and letting you decide what to think about any of these issues.
Yeah. So Linda Grams, whose son actually went viral during the Olympics. She has a very cute son.
Yeah.
And he was loving the ice skating, and he went viral. So she asks, can you touch on the talk of potential Russian cyber attack on NYC? And thank you for everything you do. So
thank you. What can I say? Well, so far, one of the things is are the Russians holding back on a cyber attack? Are they just not capable of it? Or how are our cyber defenses right now? Because remember, if we have a good defense, we might be blocking them from majorly taking us out. The Russians have shown an ability to attack us through the years. One of the things that we both know is that if the Russians messed with the power grid, internet, something huge or major in this country, we would do the same to them. So sort of mutually assured destruction. So they're not going to, ideally, go nuts and try to take down our water, energy, internet, that sort of thing, because we do the same thing to them. Now, what are they going to do? Are they going to hit individual businesses, etc.? We haven't seen that widespread yet, knock on wood. Let's hope we're okay. But ultimately, one would hope that between our cyber units, the Department of Homeland Security, Defense Department, etc., that we have effective countermeasures in place in order to block whatever that cyber threat is. Or are the Russians holding back? Are they going to try something in Ukraine and then conduct a cyber attack concurrently on the U.S.? Are they coordinated enough? Do they have it together enough to do that? It's really unclear because war is murky like that. So whether we are fighting them, whether they're holding back, or whether they've tried and we fought them off, or whether they're holding back, is a good question. I don't know.
Some people are saying the badges aren't working tonight, so then they aren't. So I'm just going to post your Venmo if you feel like you want to donate.
Okay, I appreciate that. That supports what I'm doing and started doing this part-time. We're trying to make this full-time, so appreciate all your support. Badges is a way to support the account. So appreciate those of you who it's working for. I'm going to find out. We'll try to figure out what's going on with that.
Ronnie Jacob says, how do reporters defend themselves? There were journalists who were shot at by Russians.
So reporters for most Western media organizations come with security teams. Typically we'll hire locally. We might, at times I've sent in teams with, this is my time at CBS and at Bloomberg, we would hire ex-special forces teams, private security teams. When we send teams into the Arab Spring in the Middle East, we'd hire a private security team. They would know locals, they know the language, they have evacuation plans, they're armed to the teeth. And so Western media will do that, especially in a war zone. And then at some point, the security guys will be not safe, let's get out, guys. And so that's typically what you'll see. You'll also hire what's known as fixers, local folks who speak the language, know the terrain, know you don't take this road at this time, know that road's been blown up, have contacts, etc. On the ground there. So the Western media typically has those fixers, has a security team. They're typically staying in one of the more modern hotels. Typically, the two sides will avoid the hotel with the journalist because you can imagine that blowing up the hotel with the journalist will not get you positive coverage. So that is sort of the hope that journalists have while reporting from the war zone, is that they'll avoid. But then, of course, you saw that dramatic footage of the Sky News reporter last week being shot at by the Russians. So, unfortunately, when you're traveling with a big camera, sometimes people mistake that camera for a weapon. So you have to be very clear that you try to make it as clearly as possible to your media.
You have a lot more questions I want to get to. Aaliyah asks, what does Putin intend to use Ukraine's land for? Is it meant to benefit Russians in the end? How?
So let's go back. Putin, as far as he's concerned, he didn't want to lose Ukraine ever, right? He thinks it was a big mistake of the Soviet Union 100 years ago to let, in the kind of creation of the Soviet Union, to have these republics feel independent, to have some regional autonomy. Then, of course, he thinks the biggest fiasco in Russian history was letting 15 countries get created in 1991. These are all the former republics of the Soviet Union that are now independent nations. He feels the most affinity for Ukraine because he's like, Ukraine is Russia, we are one. And so what does he intend to use it for? Very unclear. Now, by the way, Ukraine is very resource rich, right? It is the breadbasket. In fact, a good percentage of wheat for the world comes from Ukraine. There's a lot of energy and minerals there. Does he intend to occupy it long term? Well, that's going to be really hard. It's a big state, and the Ukrainians show that they do not want the Russians there. So he's going to have trouble managing that. I think, bottom line, it's less about the land right now and more about the fact that he wants a friendly government that is not close to Europe, that is close to him, that gives him direct access to the Black Sea. He owns the Black Sea, turn it into basically a Russian lake. And, he's able to use Ukraine the same way he uses Belarus, which he's got the guy Lukashenko, who's the leader there. He basically does whatever Putin wants. That's what Putin wants in Ukraine. He wants Zelensky out. He wants a friendly regime like he had briefly for a couple of years before there was a revolution in Ukraine in 2014. And that's the bottom line. Now, none of us can get inside Putin's brain right now. But yes, somebody wrote here, Alyssa wrote, puppet government. That's what he wants. What do you got, El?
Aaliyah also asked another question. Since you know a lot about the administration, how do you believe Trump would have responded to this work differently
I love this question.
from Biden? Whether it's better or worse?
All right, guys. So first of all, nobody knows what would have happened if Trump was president. We're going to premise that with that. I've been thinking about this just because everyone keeps asking, well, if Trump was president, what would be different? And by the way, I did get if Hillary was president in 2016, how things would be different. I can't go back 6 years. But let's try to go back a year.
On him, right?
I mean, she came to Russia as Secretary of State with the reset button, and then she realized that Putin's a liar. I mean, Bush looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul and realized he was a liar. Condi Rice will say the same thing. Hillary Clinton will say the same thing. Barack Obama will say the same thing. You go and you try with Putin and it just doesn't work out. It's been like that for 20 years. How would things be different with Trump? Let's lay out scenarios because we don't know. Scenario one, he's reelected. And according to one of his more recent security advisors, Trump was set to pull out of NATO because it was a second term. He doesn't care anymore. He wasn't a fan of NATO. He always goes, meth with NATO. NATO's not spending enough money. These other countries, why are we supporting you? NATO sucks. And his advisors would be like, Mr. President, NATO's a thing. You need to support it. It's important. So in that scenario one, he pulls out of NATO. He's like, Ukraine, you're not letting into NATO. Why would we do that? Putin has a good argument on you. And so then Putin doesn't see the need to go in because effectively Trump is messing with NATO and not close to Ukraine. Scenario one. Scenario two, same thing with Trump, but Putin sees weakness in that and decides to invade Ukraine anyway. So we might be in the same boat. Scenario three, none of this NATO stuff happens. Putin decides to get aggressive with Ukraine anyway. And in that scenario, Trump doesn't mess around there. He decides to get aggressive and he sends troops into Ukraine in advance. Maybe. Now, one would argue that Trump, if you look at his 4 years, he was all about getting the U.S. out of wars and not into wars. Then there's scenario four, which is Armageddon, which is now we're in the scenario. Putin doesn't care what Trump has to say, and Putin's threatening nukes, and Trump is like, you threaten nukes, I threaten nukes back. So that's the scary scenario, which I lay out. But again, we don't know, right? We don't know if Trump pulls out of NATO. We don't know if Trump is still messing with Zelensky in Ukraine because he thinks they're too close to Democrats. Remember, he was impeached the first time over threatening aid to Zelensky because he felt that they were too close to Hunter Biden. So how does the Hunter Biden thing play into this? Does he effectively push back on Putin? That's a scenario two, right? Which some people are saying, I like scenario three. I'm a Trump supporter and he would have done that. Okay, scenario four takes you to Putin goes in anyway, and then we have the two of them showing off their nuclear weapons on runways. And that's what we're living in 2022. So I think any of those scenarios could be happening. I know people like to speculate on this. I think ultimately, guys, it's bad because that's what the Russians want to do is divide us anyway. They want to distract us and be like, let the Americans fight about who would have been president, who would have done a better job. They enjoy that. They enjoy splitting us apart. So I don't know that it serves anyone's purpose to deal with scenarios that don't exist, right? Biden's the president. Putin's at war in Ukraine. What are we doing about it?
The female Larry David, among other people, have asked, why isn't Putin being charged with war crimes? In some way, I feel like we are not helping Ukraine.
So war crimes is a separate thing. It might take years to investigate. He might be charged with war crimes and then never face trial for war crimes because the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague doesn't have a police force that could just show up in places and arrest people. You need to arrest that person or they need to be given up by their own country. Now, as far as what we could do, we could send them more military weapons. We could institute a no-fly zone. And of course, that risks that we now have to fly over Ukraine and shoot down any Russian jets or missiles that are coming by, thereby leading to potential direct warfare between the US and Russia, which is something we've tried to avoid since 1945. Mm-hmm. So that's the concern there. But yes, I mean, at some point, push may come to shove, and you might decide, we might decide we got to do it. We got to do it. The Russians, we can't let them take Kyiv. We can't let them destroy Ukraine. And too many civilians are dying. And that might be a scenario that we face in the coming days or weeks.
It's Krish says, I'm looking for a girlfriend. Did I throw you off with that question?
We are launching the Mo News dating service in the coming weeks. It'll be an app, but it's only for informed people who know about the news. You got to pass a news test to get into the app.
That actually is kind of a good idea.
Right?
I would have liked to be on that dating app.
So hold on, let's play this out. So my wife Alex is behind the scenes. So in this dating app, you have to take a news quiz, and based on your news acumen, you get put in a category. So you are matching with people who have passed that many current events questions with you. So if you passed 11 out of 15, you get into the superstar current events, and then 5 out of 15. And then there's a group of you who I'd be surprised if I have followers who don't know anything. I just feel like all of you are informed.
Yeah,
so it's just great.
Followers...
there's the people who are I don't watch the news, it's too depressing. Okay, good luck to you. You're not going to be on the Mo News dating service. It's the thing.
Everyone's saying it's brilliant. It's
right?
Brilliant. Oh, it's brilliant. They were laughing my ass off.
Maybe that's the premium newsletter. You get the Wednesday edition plus access to the dating service.
Leah would be the first to sign up.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I think down the road we can make that a part.
We can work on that.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Magic Mike asked, do you think it's safe for Americans to be traveling to foreign places?
Yes. I know people are concerned about travel right now. The only place I'd be concerned about going to right now, just because it's sort of chaotic, is some of those Eastern European countries that are taking all the refugees right now. Obviously, you can't fly into Ukraine. You can't fly into Russia. So, if it's a former Soviet republic or in Eastern Europe, definitely know the terrain. But if you're going to Asia, the Middle East, there's safer places in the Middle East than others. Africa, Western Europe, South America, anywhere in North America, you should be fine.
Okay. Shayna says, what happens if they attack financial systems here and abroad? Guessing any American traveling would be stranded with no access to ATMs, credit cards.
Sure. Listen, guys, if you're nervous about traveling right now, then, given there's a war going on, then, I don't know, push back the trip, I guess. I was answering that last question more of personal safety. I don't think that if you went to Madrid or Rome or Athens or Istanbul or, London or Africa or Buenos Aires or whatever, that you should be worried about your own safety. As far as yes, if financial systems go down or there's a major cyber attack, travel wisely, right? Have cash available to you and ensure that, that's the thing. I don't know what more to say if you have some huge vacation you were taking and, it's not to Ukraine, Russia, or any of those bordering countries. But even then, if you're Polish or you're familiar with Poland and you want to go to Warsaw, just know that they're taking in a lot of refugees. It's a country in crisis right now. But also, if you want to help the situation, then go there. But always have backup power, backup phones, backup cash. Be ready.
So Persida says, I'm married, so no dating app for me, but if you could add a news quiz to the newsletter somehow, that'd be great.
Oh, maybe that's a good idea, the weekly news quiz.
It's a great idea.
We were worried about the newsletter being too long, but maybe it's a separate weekend issue that you get on Saturday morning. I don't know. What do you guys think? News quiz?
Someone said, Mosh, you need the AirPods Pro, but you have them in your ear, so that's what he has.
I got AirPods Pro. Alex got
but yeah, I think if the back end of if Facebook if the newsletter can allow you to add the news quiz for sure.
We could do news quiz. I don't know that can be an interactive news quiz. It would have to just be like question, answers, and then like at the bottom, like here are your answers. It won't be at least as the software is right now. It won't be like an interactive like quiz type thing. But but I like that idea. I'm gonna write that down. Whose idea was that?
That was Persida_B.
Persida B. Thank you. I like that idea. I'll give you credit.
Oh, questions and then answers on Mondays, Regan says. Or polls and IG stories, Eve Port says.
Got it.
Yeah, people are loving it. You're getting a lot of buzz on that.
All right, good.
Sherry Cal says, what do you think the most important things are to explain the conflict to our kids? I have a 13-year-old.
I think the most important thing is to explain that ultimately, first, if you're here in the U.S., don't take for granted the country that you're in and the peace that you've been able to live in for a very long time, right? There are situations we watch that happen around the globe that we take for granted sometimes, the relative peace that we live in. That our biggest complaint is, you see some of the truckers in D.C. who, are protesting, what's left of vaccine rules, gas prices. And obviously we have issues in this country, right? We have our challenges. We have things to fix in this country like anybody else. But that ultimately, don't take for granted where you live. Secondarily, ultimately, there is man's inhumanity to man. That unfortunately, we believe we've evolved as a species, but unfortunately we see terrible things that happen in the world. And by the way, if you took the pictures from today in Ukraine, taken to black and white, does it look familiar? You'd feel like you're watching World War II or World War I all over again, unfortunately. And you're like, well, that was 100 years ago. Well, guess what? We're still acting the same way. Ultimately also know that there's a lot of extreme rhetoric around war. People, throw out things like World War III and Armageddon and nuclear, that, you live in a safe country, that ultimately this is one country's decided to attack another country, and we're trying our best to ensure that innocent people do not get hurt in the process, but not to live in fear that, you can't go outside, etc. And that it's important, if you're going to be a citizen, to familiarize with what's going on, that history is important, that geography is important, that ultimately it's not just about living here, it's about being aware of what's going on. Why is that going on? You don't want to have to be surprised by stuff, right? You want to be aware of who these leaders are, where this is in the world. These are large countries, and the history associated with these countries. And this is not the first time, right? You could go back more than 1,000 years in the history of Russia and Ukraine. And it's important to understand those things and to have a better understanding of why these things happen and where they're happening. And I think that's what I would say, is that just make yourself informed about these things, because ultimately you're going to live a long life. Unfortunately, these things are going to happen in the world, and the more informed you can be about this conflict, it makes you, more plugged in and more aware of what to anticipate and how to react to things in the future.
Jess Ford 84 says that person should listen to Sharon Says So podcast with Dr. Becky for advice on explaining these things to kids too.
Yeah, I mean, Sharon Says So is she's a teacher, so she works with kids all the time. So she would have probably much better advice than I did there. But
no, you have good advice, and I'm sure they have good advice too. Okay. Okay, so you have a lot more questions.
We can do a few more.
You could do a few more. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. So the Modern Maccabee says, isn't it a terrible idea to let Russia and China negotiate an Iranian nuclear deal on our behalf?
So what's going on right now, it's not the Russians, the Chinese, the Europeans, and us are all involved in negotiations right now with, I need to charge the phone or we're going to lose everything. Hold on one second. There we go. So there is an ongoing negotiation right now happening between the U.S., China, Russia, and the Europeans, and Iran in regards to the nuclear weapons. Now, Iran has a civilian nuclear power program. They have been working towards a nuclear weapon for a very long time. There was an agreement during the end of the Obama administration to basically get the Iranians not to build nuclear weapons in exchange for lightening the sanctions on them and letting them basically freeing a whole bunch of money. They have a huge bunch of oil, natural gas. They have nearly 90 million people live in that country. and open up their economy. That agreement lasted for a couple of years. There are questions as to how good Iran was at abiding by that agreement, and also the essence of that agreement, which is like, don't fund armed movements and terror groups around the Middle East and other things. There were questions inside Iran as to whether any of that money got to the people, or how much of it got to the people versus the mullahs. And it's a global conversation with Iran, right? These sanctions have been on Iran for several decades. It is a little weird, I would agree, that right now it's us and the Russians who have major issues, but working together in Austria to negotiate a deal with the Iranians. But it'll be interesting to see kind of what unfolds there, because ultimately opening up the Iranian economy, it's a global thing. The U.S. spent a long time getting other countries on board with the sanctions for Iran, given the way Iran conducts itself. What comes of that will be interesting and potentially pretty controversial if we come to an agreement and there are feelings that the West, Russia, China gave away the store, so to speak, to Iran because we were desperate for the oil.
Melissa asks, how do you, Mosh, see this playing out?
Oh man, I don't do predictions, guys. I admittedly didn't see a scenario that was likely that Putin was actually going to try to invade and take over all of Ukraine. I thought he was going to just go max for the eastern region and call it a day to basically combine the eastern region with Crimea and not go for Kyiv and kill all these civilians, etc. So I don't know how this ends. I do think that the West probably needs to ratchet up the pressure beyond sanctions. And so I don't know. Unfortunately, it might get a little scarier before it gets better, because right now Putin sees the West as pretty weak on this stuff and sees that he has a completely green card to do whatever he wants, a green light to do what he wants. And so some countries in the West are going to have to figure out how aggressive they want to stand up to Putin before this thing ends. Because ultimately, remember, Russian military, more powerful, much bigger than the Ukrainian military. So they will, at some point, be able to outlast what the Ukrainians are capable, the defense they're putting up. So what happens in that scenario? I would hate to see the West watch Kyiv fall. And I hope it doesn't come to that.
A View to a Jilly Jill says, where can I learn more about NATO?
Where can I learn more about NATO? I wish I had a book offhand. I mean, there's a lot of research online as to NATO.
I'm going to save the question for you and you can post about it.
I mean, maybe we'll do like a NATO tutorial. Ultimately, NATO came about out of World War II. It was the Western military alliance that went up against the Soviet military alliance. The goal was that all the European countries at the time, Western Europe and the US, would have an alliance, that if the Russians ever invaded one of the European countries, the entirety of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, everyone around the North Atlantic, would come to the defense of that country. That existed through the Cold War. Soviet collapses in 91. They decide to keep NATO around, expand NATO, because they're like, one day the Russians might want to take back this land and become the Soviet Union again. So let's expand. So they expanded, but then some people felt that to the Russians that was a poke in the eye. Why do you keep taking NATO closer to our border? We view NATO as a threat. And of course, that was part of the discussion in regards to Ukraine. That's your quick tutorial on NATO. But I think, I think there's the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations has some good background reading on NATO, and I'd check out their website.
So Susie Y.YBR and other people as well during this live have said there's a documentary on Netflix called Winter on Fire, and it explains a lot of why Ukraine will never surrender to Russia.
Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainians have always kind of lived this dividing line in the past couple decades between wanting to be, part of Europe and feeling this affinity for Russia. Putin has really damaged that. If Putin thought he was going to win over, they would be greeted as a liberator. Remember that phrase? Dick Cheney used it on Iraq. We're going to be greeted as liberators. So Putin had a similar impression. He's like, these people are Russian. They speak Russian. They love me. When I come, they hate their government. The government's corrupt. Their government is a corrupt bunch of Nazi drug addicts. Well, it turns out that it's not the way the Ukrainians felt about their own government. Remember, Ukraine back in 91 voted 90+% to be independent of the Soviet Union and has been overwhelmingly pro-EU for at least the past decade. It's one of the reasons they had the revolution they did in 2014 against a Russia-friendly leader named Yanukovych. And so Putin has not found that. And if you're looking at the future of Ukraine now, Ukrainians are like, I want nothing to do with this Russian country. Many would say that. I'm looking towards Europe. I'm looking towards modernity. I don't like what this guy especially has done to my country. Even if they had an affinity in terms of speaking Russian and feeling this historical connection to Russia until now.
Leffel Ming says, what are the chances of nuclear war?
Oof, guys. At this point, extremely unlikely. I think you could say that Putin has made some dumb decisions, but I don't believe that Putin has a death wish, and neither do we. Ultimately, nuclear war means the end of civilization as we know it. To end it over Ukraine, even I don't think, God, I hope not, but I don't think Putin would do that.
Diane says, could our special forces go in secretly and work with the Ukraine forces?
Listen, there's enough cell phone cameras these days. It's very hard not to be seen doing stuff. I'm sure there might be some U.S. intelligence agents. I don't know if it's special forces, but maybe CIA would be there. I'd be surprised if they're not in some way, shape, or form. I know they're trying to be very careful because remember, if the Russians capture an American soldier, then that turns into a whole thing. So I think, Biden and the American government would be transparent that if the U.S. troops are going in there, plus they'd want to show the Russians hey, we're sending in our troops. You gonna be done with this now? And see how Putin reacts to that. And it'll be interesting to see if, the White House decides to change its tune on that, even verbally, and see how the Russians react. I'm sure that's something they could test the waters on in the coming weeks.
Super Califragilistic asks, can you tell us more about prisoners of war and what they can mean for either side in the long term?
So this is an important question, and I appreciate you asking that. Earlier
there were a couple
today,
people that talked about
yeah, no, because it's a thing, and I'm glad we're talking about it. So there have been a whole bunch of videos online circulating, specifically of Russian soldiers who were captured, who are sending a message to their mother, or criticizing their own government. Guys, just know that there's something called the Geneva Convention that was passed after World War II, and among the things that's considered a crime is using enemy soldiers who are captured as propaganda material. So people are why don't you post that video of there was a video that went around of a Russian soldier getting served tea and calling his mother, FaceTiming his mother. Guys, that's unfortunately this is some kid from Russia who's been sent in. He's a soldier who's been captured. There could be ramifications for their families back in Russia if they are seen on video, condemning things. And so ultimately, POWs are given certain rights, even if you're fighting, no matter what fighting force you're fighting for, whether you're American, whether you're Russian, whether you're Ukrainian, whether you're Chinese, etc. And part of those rights, based on the Geneva Conventions, is not to be used in public propaganda materials. And that's why one of the few places you ever see that is Al-Qaeda, when they take, their civilians or military, they, put them in front of they put them in front of a flag with a sword. They use them as propaganda. We don't do that. That's not something that Western modern governments do. And so, to the extent that, if they're sent to you, I would dissuade you from reposting them. So.
Ellery Brunner says, what's going on in the U.S. that would be making headlines if not for the war in Ukraine? Do politicians take advantage of headline dominance like this?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's certainly something that is done. Here are the other stories that have been happening that you'd probably be hearing more about. 7 dead in tornadoes in Iowa. There's also a school shooting today in Iowa that I believe a couple kids died in. The record flooding in Australia, 1 in 1,000-year flooding in Australia. Last week there was also a major UN climate report that came out, so I think you would have seen a lot of coverage around both that climate change issue along with what's going on in Australia. You did see the Supreme Court today reject the Bill Cosby appeal, so Bill Cosby is a free man for a while. You'd probably be seeing a lot more coverage of the Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Jackson. She's been going around Capitol Hill, meetings have been positive, but you'd be hearing a lot more about that. You might be hearing more this week is the 2-year anniversary of the week the world shut down for COVID. Where were you last March 11th? March 11, 2020. So you'd probably be hearing more of that. I know there's been a lot of concern, like still they haven't quite figured out a vaccine for under 5. That would be a thing. You'd probably be getting a lot more attention towards the truckers and the Beltway who are trying to replicate the Canadian truckers. Those are probably a few of the stories you'd be hearing a lot about.
Yeah.
At least the stories that I've been familiar with. Probably there's a whole discussion that's coming out of the fine today of the Atlanta Falcons player who was found to be gambling and basically they've ended he's basically been suspended in perpetuity, at least for next year. And the whole weird situation we have now where there's so much gambling, e-gambling around sports, but then you're suspending the player for gambling. Those are among the stories you might be hearing about. Let's take one more or two more and then call it. We're an hour and a half in.
It's an hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
A lot, and I feel like we could keep going.
Yeah.
A lot of people want Mosh merch, so hopefully
Mosh?
there are people who are. I want to just ask because you have an incredible community.
Yeah.
If you know anybody who has like a t-shirt company or a great. Like I know you're friends with the Shop Forward girls, and Amy, maybe you could talk to them about making merch for you. That would be awesome. So if you know anybody who does that for a living, please contact them.
Who makes good merch? Let us know if you're you're a merch maker. If you're looking to making Mosh merch, if you're a merch maker, let us know. We might use you to make our merch.
Okay. Is there anything else, Mosh, that you feel like you want to discuss?
Listen, I think we've discussed a wide variety of issues tonight related to Russia and Ukraine. I hope I answered most of your questions. I hope I soothed some of your fears that nuclear war is not imminent, folks, God forbid. And that, unfortunately, though, it's hard to see an end game urgently. Thursday will be crucial in Turkey to see if Russia's going to take these negotiations seriously. I mean, Russia's messing around right now, guys, because they don't see anyone who's, ready to stand up to them. They're going to keep making their move on Ukraine. So until there's someone else on the ground helping back up the Ukrainians in a real way, beyond just sending weapons, that's unfortunate situation that it looks like right now.
Before we sign off, you have one comment, one question.
All right.
The comment from Leah is that Joe Jonas' wife, Sophie Turner, is pregnant with their second child, so we wish them big congratulations.
Big congrats. Good luck to Sophie and Joe on number 2.
And also people are wondering how your plants are doing.
How are our plants? So this is the Monstrata. It's doing pretty well. It deserves, I need to give it a little love and care. We brought it in over the weekend. Probably need to trim some leaves here and clean it up. The banana leaf plant I think is also doing pretty well. Survived care of we were traveling. Everyone's like, you guys keep moving. Well, we left our apartment in December. We were waiting for an apartment in February, so we were kind of traveling around.
You're on the road.
In the meantime, we had our plants were being taken care of by, what do you call it, foster parents?
They were foster parents, Alex and Elliot.
Thank you to those two who took care of the plants. Plants are doing well.
You miss them. You miss them a lot.
I did, even the apartment before the plants, you bring the plants in, it feels different. It's nice to have some life.
It does. Plants make a huge difference. They really do.
Yeah.
I can't believe, in prior apartments, I was afraid to get a plant because I didn't want to kill it. It makes a huge difference. And it's great. And they're natural air filters, too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
S. Miller says, thanks for doing Mondays. To be able to interact with you and your woke followers is so great.
Woke? My woke following. Well, it's great to be with all of you. Somebody's asking where I'm based. We're in Brooklyn, New York. We just moved over here. Anyway, this has been good. I appreciate all your questions. I look forward to your feedback. We're gonna figure out how to do this news quiz thing. That should be fun. We did do, for one of the first issues, we did like a President's Day trivia for President's Day. So maybe we need to carry that through for other stuff. By the way, happy early International Women's Day tomorrow, Al. Tomorrow is the 111th International Women's Day, started in 1911. Congrats to you, by the way. Look this up. There is also an International Men's Day. Less noted, happens in November.
Mosh,
so
who
the
cares
dudes.
about Men's Day? Mo,
I just want people to know.
What are you going to do to celebrate Women's Day?
I'm going to celebrate. What would you like? How would you like me to celebrate
We could talk about it.
the women in my life, Alex? Whatever you want.
Well,
Tomorrow's International Women's Day, guys. Alex gets what she wants.
But then we have
Breakfast?
your speech.
Okay.
or your talk at night. Okay. So Yasmin604 says, yes, can you mention Brittany Griner? I think she's an interesting case. Black non-conforming LGBTQ basketball player.
Yeah, Brittany Griner is a WNBA player who was arrested in, let me pull this up, was arrested in Moscow. They allege that she had some illegal drugs on her. Obviously the Russian government, so that's unclear, but there was at the airport, Russian customs said that she was found with hash oil and stuff that's legal in Russia. She's being held right now. And I know that her wife back here in the States has called for her release. And you've seen, concerns from the NBA, Phoenix Mercury, etc. about her. The drug offense apparently carries up to 10 years in prison. It'll be, hopefully, of course, she won't have to serve that. And this will highly likely be a high-level negotiation between the U.S. and Russia. Now, mind you, there's a war going on, so that doesn't, speed things up for Brittany, unfortunately, because there's more urgent matters at hand. You would imagine that if this took place without the war going on, you'd be hearing a lot more about that. Ultimately, the Russians claim this is about drugs and only drugs. We don't have any third-party verification as to what she had on her. And frankly, at this, the Russians also have the ability to kind of waive it, being like, just don't do this again, as opposed to taking it to the end and trying to set some sort of example or something. So let us see. People are asking, do I think she had drugs in her? I have no idea. I mean, she could totally not. The Russians might have planted it. She might have had it. She might have not. I have no idea. I don't speculate on these things. I'm just telling you what people are saying. I do hope, though, that the U.S. State Department can negotiate her release as quickly as possible, because I don't wish being in a Russian prison on anyone.
People are still talking about the dating app. It's very funny.
Oh, the Mo News dating app?
Yeah. I'll tell you after.
All right.
Very funny. Okay. So, Mosh, as always, you really outdid yourself. Magic Mike says that it was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I can't believe 90 minutes went by so fast, and it was enjoyable as usual.
Well, it was even more enjoyable for me, guys. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate the conversations that are happening here, that we can have a civil conversation in this small corner of the internet.
Ryan says, do them on Wednesday and Friday, too.
Oh, everybody just wants more. They want more newsletters. They want more lives. Great.
I don't know how.
Alex would kill me. They'd be like, no, Alex, I think I've decided to go live every day of the week.
It's not that I would kill you at all. I actually want you to do that.
Yeah.
And especially times like this when there's a lot of news happening.
Yeah.
But Melissa says, please, Mosh and Al, don't ever have kids. You will not have time for us.
Oh. I mean, listen, I appreciate your thoughts on that matter, and I will take that into serious consideration. Well, Al, the people, they don't want us to have kids because they want more of us.
Mosh, says Melissa.
Yeah. All right, but I understand. The kids initially, they have bedtimes that are relatively early, so I can still be with you at 9 p.m. until the kids get to a certain age, and then they're doing the lives.
Oh, okay.
They're going to be very informed children, God willing. No announcement here, guys. All right, thank you for everything. Stay tuned. I'm going to try to stay up to date with everything that's going on, and appreciate, as always, your questions, and subscribe to the newsletter. Thanks to those of you who bought badges tonight. If you didn't have badges available on the bottom of the screen and you want to support the account, there's a link in my bio to Venmo to subscribe to the premium edition of the newsletter. Appreciate any support you can provide us, and we'll go from there.
Julie Wishko says, all Mosh all the time, the CNN of Instagram Lives.
We'll go with that. We'll go with that 24/7.
Nice.
Thank you very much. The information tomorrow night, I'll repost the thing.
I'll repost it too.
Alex will repost it, and then I'll
if you
repost
want
the
to come
post.
see us, if you're in the city, please.
6 p.m. tomorrow night in New York City.
I think it's later. No, is it? 6?
I think 6. Yeah.
It is 6?
It's early side. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right.
That's so exciting! I can't wait to.
It's on
meet you
the
guys.
Upper Eastish side. All right.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys. Thank you.